Does it make me faster? Does it keep my files just as accurate or better? And does it not dump a bunch of new headaches on me that wipe out any benefits I was supposed to gain from it? That's my simple test that I apply to every tool that somebody tries to sell me on, or any gadget or app that I might incorporate into a claims workflow. And for a very long time, drones failed that test. The promise of drones, so there. But the technology, the workflow, the carrier acceptance, airspace restrictions, none of that was quite ready for the high volume independent catastrophe adjuster in the field. So yeah, I've told you to hold off on drones. Until now. I just sat down with Loveland Innovations, and these are the guys that build technology that turns a drone into an inspection tool that adjusters can actually use on a claim. And what I learned is that the gap between the promise and the reality may finally be starting to close. I'm Matt, and I've been in the property claims industry since the late 90s. And in this video, you're going to hear directly from Kevin Wonder, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at Loveland Innovations, about what drone technology actually looks like for independent adjusters in 2026 and beyond. Talking about what's in the kit, what it costs, which drones you should consider buying, can you still even get DJI drones, how many roofs can you realistically knock out in a day, how weather and airspace restrictions actually play out in the field these days, and whether you need to be a licensed adjuster or you can just get your Part 107 certification to start making money with your new drone. We also get into where AI fits in, not as a replacement for your judgment, but as a tool to make your decisions faster and more defensible. And we talk about where carrier adoption actually stands right now, because that matters really more than anything else if you're trying to figure out whether it's time to pull the trigger on a drone. So let's launch into this, starting now.
Kevin Wonder, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Loveland Innovations. We are an inspection technology company. So we've written a variety of types of tech that adjusters and other people in field can use when they're inspecting roofs. So that includes drones, it includes AI, it includes mobile devices. In the industry, we're known mostly for our drone technology, which we introduced our first product back in 2017, used by roofing contractors, insurance adjusters, and we do some work in solar, but for the purpose of today, we'll talk primarily around what we do with insurance companies and roofing or insurance companies and adjusters, I should say.
If an adjuster is carrying this kind of gear, what are they carrying day to day? Like with as far as like the drone itself, chargers, batteries, other accessories, spares, and stuff like that.
Typically when we kit out an adjuster, what they'll have with them is we like giving them a hard case. It just keeps it safe as it moves around the truck or the car. In that case, they'll have the drone, likely have a couple of extra propellers just in case they run into anything there. Propellers get weak and they wear down over time. Extra batteries and a car charger is really what they need. We typically recommend having anywhere from 2 to 3 batteries. That way, as you're driving and you've got windshield time, you're recharging batteries in between jobs.
Gotcha. So how many do you think you can inspect with on one charge? Like how many houses?
It actually depends on the drone. Generally speaking, with most drones, you'll get about 25 to 30 minutes of flight time. Depending on how you're doing the inspections can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes on average for a residential home. If you're doing something bigger, it's going to take a little longer. So generally, we find people are doing 3 to 4 homes per battery. And if they're charging throughout the day and those batteries kind of get refreshed over time, we've seen people doing anywhere from 15 to 25 inspections a day just with that kit of 2 or 3 batteries.
Probably a question I should ask earlier, like what drones are supported by what you guys do?
When we initially launched the product, we were isolated to just a couple of drones. We leveraged what's called a software development kit. It's a kind of a fancy way to say DJI gave us access to some of their software. But today, basically any drone can be used. So if an adjuster's got a $250 Potensic drone, or they've got a $7,000 DJI drone, pretty much anywhere in that spectrum can be used with our product.
Okay, cool. So which one do people typically use though? Like what's the one you guys like the most?
So if they want to use like our full suite of automated flight technology, Mavic 3 Enterprise by DJI is probably the one that's used the most. But right now, because of price point and because of its sort of portability, we're seeing the DJI Mavic Mini, the DJI Mini 4 and that series be really popular. Those drones, you can get them fully kitted for under $2,000, and that'll come with hard cases, and it'll come with batteries and the drone and a bunch of extra gimmicks. And so it's pretty cheap and cost effective.
Is what you guys do with Loveland Innovations, is it just kind of a technology platform, or are you actually hiring pilots and giving them jobs?
We focus on the technology platform. We have partners who have networks of drone pilots. So if there's an adjuster who wanted to get extra work or wanted to be part of that network, we could refer them to those partners. But what we do is we focus primarily on the technology.
Gotcha. And where can somebody find those partners, like a list of those partners?
If they call us, we can give them a list of who they are. Those are customers, those are networks that generally are very familiar with our product. They do work across a variety of industries. Some of them, because of the proprietary nature of our relationship with them, don't like me talking publicly about them. But if an adjuster wants to get introduced, we're happy to do that for them.
From a little bit more of a practical standpoint, how does obviously, so like rain and things like that, an adjuster's not getting on the roof anyway, but are there any drawbacks to trying to operate a drone in winds, like higher winds, really cold temperatures or really hot temperatures? Like I know my cell phone, if I'm standing up on a roof and in Dallas in August, it'll just shut off. I mean, I don't know the drones do that, but rain and things like that. I mean, how does weather affect operations?
Let's start with heat and cold. These are devices that operate in field. We have seen at times devices, particularly if you're using a remote controller or you're using an iPad to fly a drone, those devices can overheat. Interestingly enough, the drone itself actually is less, or it's more resilient to heat than a device would be. And so in situations where we've seen challenges there, it's more about the device than it is about the drone itself. I personally have flown and inspected homes in sub 20 degree weather. And most of these drones are rated to be 20 to 30 degrees. I don't recommend that because it's uncomfortable, but it's doable. I'll tell you what actually broke down for the earliest was my fingers. I couldn't move my fingers the way I needed to touch screens and those kind of things. Right. And so as it relates to temperature, these drones are pretty resilient. Most of these drones will fly pretty steady in 20 to 30 mile an hour winds. The challenge is going to be if the drone is flying and it's shaking too much in those winds, then the camera starts to shake as well. And so, I would just be sensitive to that. They'll fly great. I've inspected properties probably into about 24 mile an hour winds without having any issues. And so, I'd rather be flying a drone than climbing a roof at 24 miles an hour. And you get pretty good photos. Talking about rain, generally rain, the drones operate pretty well. I think the challenge is actually going to be more about the quality of the photos. Certain materials, when it gets wet, you may not be able to see things the same way as if it's dry. That's probably the bigger consideration as it relates to using a drone in rain. Gotcha.
So in other words, what it sounds like is that sort of the range of like weather conditions for the adjuster themselves is probably about the same as it is for the drone.
We've often told people, if you're not going to climb on a roof in this weather, you may not want to inspect in this weather for a variety of different reasons. I will say, I think that it expands the spectrum of what they're willing to inspect in a little bit, because the drone can operate a little more safely than someone can on a roof. But generally speaking, we tell people, hey, if you wouldn't inspect it in this weather yourself, maybe don't get out there with the drone.
What about like airspace authorization, like near airports, military bases? Colorado Springs, there's bases all over the place. I'm in, Kalispell, which is right next to Glacier National Park, and there's a town called West Glacier right next to that, and national parks. I know they have some restrictions. So how does that restrict the pilot's ability to get work done?
There's a couple of, I would say, tiers of concern there that you got to consider. For most just normal operating airports, the FAA has allowed for automatic authorization. And so the way that works is based on where you are in relation to that airport, they have certain parameters that if you're willing to fall within those parameters and your flight operations don't break those parameters, you can file for automatic authorization. It's a process called LAANC, LAANC, and that will get you authorization pretty quickly. Now, there are some scenarios, though, where Lance is not allowed, and so you have to file for waivers. That typically can take anywhere from a couple of days to potentially a couple of weeks, depending on where you are. The reality is, I'd love to say that we're in a place now where you can fly a drone anywhere, but the reality is that we're not there yet. Right? If I'm around a military base, it's very unlikely I'm going to have authorization to fly unless I go through channels at the military base. The FAA will actually pass over the authorization of that to the base itself. But for the most part, if you're a little diligent and you do a little bit of work ahead, you can get authorization in most areas to fly.
Gotcha. It just occurred to me, if just as a hypothetical, if a carrier has a large number of policies in force near, Fort Sam Houston or whatever in San Antonio, they may, if they have like a major cat event, like a big hailstorm hits, and they're like, oh, geez, it's all right next to the base. It seems to me that and you can maybe confirm or deny or whatever this, but like if I was the carrier, I might be like, well, we want these guys to use drones. So we're going to have to just kind of maybe we'll see if we can get blanket authorization. Is it maybe kind of goes up a level from like the individual pilot?
I think it can. We are aware, and that specific case, I can't speak to with great definity, but we are aware of situations where if an organization knows there's going to be a lot of operations near a specific area. I'll give you an example. We had a solar company who did a lot of work in Southern California around airports. And because of some of the regulations in California, where all new homes have to have solar panels on them, they had actually worked to get a blanket authorization from the airports in the area, even the military bases in the area, that said, hey, if we're operating with the following parameters and we just give you a heads up when we're going to be in field, they had a pretty blanket authorization to use drones in those areas. And so, yeah, that went from the individual inspector up to a corporation working with the regulatory bodies there.
That kind of makes sense, especially as, more and more widespread adoption. Maybe kind of give us a little bit of a rundown of exactly what this does and the use cases for an adjuster or a pilot using a drone on like storm damage claims. Is it just getting the dimensions of the roof, or is it actually identifying damage? How's it work?
I think that what they're going to use a drone for will be dependent on a variety of things. So I guess I'll answer that by saying, what could drone technology do and what can it encompass when they're on site? Generally speaking, there's some things that the adjusters can gather from technology like ours. They'll be able to get really good imagery. That's where I think drone technology started, right? Is can we get good imagery faster, more efficiently, safely of a roof? That's kind of the baseline. What is it that you're using a drone for? Then as you layer on other technologies, so let's say we layer on AI. AI can help you identify what could or couldn't be damaged. In the vernacular of many organizations, you'll hear, can AI identify anomalies that we can look at? In some cases, you look at it as an anomaly. In other cases, you can look at it as specific things. AI may be able to tell you, hey, we think that's hail. We think that's rust. We think that's soft metal damage. We think that's ponding water, or whatever that might be. Depending on the AI you're using, you're going to have a different level of clarity as to what it is you're evaluating. So AI can help identify those types of things. And then you can layer on technologies like computer vision, where that's basically 3D modeling technology. We gather all the photos, you generate a 3D model, and using that 3D model, then we start getting roof dimensions, and we start getting roof diagrams. And that's where you can get, a measurement file that can get put into other systems like an Xactimate, like a CoreLogic, or other estimatics and then bidding platforms that they may use. And so it really runs the gamut there as to what they can do. But a lot of it, I think, will depend on who they're doing work for, what they have access to, and how they want to put this into their workflow. Speaking
of which, what are the different kinds of work? I mean, I think I remember you have the adjusting stuff, but you also have like underwriting, inspections or whatever. What else can a Part 107 certified pilot do with their drone to make money?
I think that there are a variety of use cases that could be considered. And, considering the audience, I think most of the work that this group is going to think about is going to be about adjusting work. Can we get adjusting work done and get those things done with drones? The other use cases that I would just kind of bring top of mind for people, we're seeing on the carrier side, we're seeing a lot of drone usage in risk assessment, in high value underwriting. And there was a period of time where we actually ran our own network of drone pilots. This was 3 or 4 years ago. We don't do that anymore. But one of our larger customers was a high value underwriter. And so they would send a pilot out there to capture photos of a roof so they could understand what's current existing, the existing state of the roof, and compare that to claims inspections that may be done later. And so in the insurance side, definitely high value underwriting is a big one. Risk assessment is another big one. If they want to step outside of kind of those traditional insurance use cases, we're seeing an increased awareness of property owners who, let's say that they own properties out of state, or they own multiple properties in state that they want inspected on a regular basis. There's an opportunity for them to have contracts with these property owners and so they'll work directly with a maintenance supervisor on preventative maintenance initiatives. They'll give them a status of the roof every 6 to 12 months. That way they kind of know, how is my roof performing over time, and how do I get ahead of preventative maintenance issues?
Shift gears a little bit here. So claims that a drone, an adjuster in the past, this is something that I talked with forensic engineering firms that do a lot of courtroom stuff. And I asked them about drones. This was a few years ago. So it's why I'm revisiting this, because this technology changes pretty quickly. If a pilot or an adjuster denies a claim without putting their foot on it, like a roof damage claim,
right, and
that ends up in court, and it turns out that the roof was in fact damaged, or did have damage. It was just, hard for the drone misidentified it, basically. Some carriers, I think, and a couple of major carriers that I heard about, this again, it's anecdotal, that were like, we don't want to have anything to do with drones. But again, that was a few years ago. How have things changed these days? How is that kind of handled, as far as whether it's correct or not, and, getting up in court?
I think that part of the challenge we faced a couple of years ago was there was this idea that technology is going to replace the ability for someone to make a decision. And, for better or for worse, that's part of what got drones and other technology a lot of hype back in 2017, 18, 19. And then we had situations where too much reliance on technology that, to be quite honest, may not have been fully ready for deployment got people into trouble. Yeah. And so over the last couple of years, one of the things that we've seen a big shift in the industry, especially in how companies like us do business, is that technology shouldn't ever replace an adjuster's decision or an engineer's decision, but it should help them make their decisions better. And so we went from this idea, can technology like drones and AI automate away an adjuster or an inspector, to how do drones and AI augment the way an adjuster or an inspector does their work? And as technology companies have taken that approach, as adjusters and carriers have taken that approach, we've gotten much better about when do we use drones to deny claims? When do we use them to approve claims? And, quite frankly, I think that because of the landscape of litigation right now and the sensitivity around that, most companies we know, if they're ever going to deny it and they have evidence to do so, they do a double check on that, because they just want to make sure that they're okay to do it. It's really in, I think, the understanding of use cases and where drone technology or AI can be best deployed that helps companies and adjusters and carriers get really good at implementing technology. There are going to be scenarios where people need to confirm it, especially on some of these high value, large properties that you've got millions of dollars in the mix. It's probably a good idea to have as many sources as you can. We started doing work recently with some forensic engineering companies, and it's been enlightening to watch the way they use not just our technology, but many others to ensure that they have as clear an understanding of what's happening on a property as possible. And to me, that's really where, and particularly in the forensic engineering space, where technology is helpful. is that the more information I have to make a decision defensible, and the better I can trust the variety of technologies, the better we are in the accuracy of the decisions that we make.
Excellent. So things are changing, it sounds like, for the better.
A little bit of background to like our approach to that as an organization. I remember in the early days of our company, I won't mention who they are, but we spoke with the carrier, and their reaction to us as we said, hey, what are you looking for in technology like drones or like AI? And in the early days, little context, the biggest problem we were asked to solve early was how do we use drones and AI to make decisions around hail better? I think that's been like the box everyone's trying to figure out. That's the problem that everyone's trying to figure out. And so the carrier told us, hey, we don't think that AI will ever tell us and do better than our adjusters, but it has to make them better at their decisions. They need to identify things faster. They need to have more confidence in the decisions they're making, and their documentation needs to be better. And so we took that approach as how do we then use high resolution imagery? How do we use AI to essentially say, Mr. or Mrs. Adjuster, here's how we can make your job better. And so everything from our UI to how they interact with our AI puts the decision back in their hands so that they're not ever at the behest of AI and a decision that AI makes, but instead they're using it to augment the work they're doing.
I guess insurance work in particular, does the pilot need to be a licensed adjuster for a lot of this stuff, like a lot of what your partners do, or is this like something that somebody can walk in off the street with a drone and take some, who's got Part 107 can do?
I think the way I answer that is a lot of it depends on the workflow, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm aware of situations where the expectation is that one person is managing the inspection all the way through to writing the claim. In that scenario, we want a licensed adjuster, because the licensed adjuster has to be the one to make the final decision. There are other scenarios I'm aware of where people are using a desk team. And so the question they get asked is, or the problem they're trying to solve is, can we send somebody in field with drone technology that we know and we trust how it's going to come back to us, so the capture is consistent, it's high resolution, it's clear, and then we have a desk team of licensed adjusters that then make the decisions on the claim. Now, there are going to be some that are going to go right through, and then you're going to get to that band of, well, if we deny this one, do we have to have somebody back out there? So they may deploy somebody back. But those two scenarios will have different requirements for the licensing, particularly from an adjusting side. I will say, and this is probably good information, the expectation of the FAA, if you're using a drone, is that you are licensed with them. So they have a license, they call it Part 107 license. It's a knowledge-based aeronautical test. The way I describe it is, does this person understand enough about how airspace works to operate something safely? That's really what it comes down to. And so if there are adjusters who are interested in getting involved with drones, that is something to look at, is making sure they get Part 107 certified. Quite frankly, if I can be Part 107 certified, I'm fairly sure most people can. It takes about 8 to 10 hours of studying. It's a 45-minute test, and then you're done.
Let's shift gears and kind of talk about liability, safety, and not only safety, like from the perspective of, I'm going to be more safe if I'm not up on a ladder and climbing on a roof, but also, what are the chances of a licensed drone operator losing control of the drone, or, pets and kids, the drone's landing and they come running up kind of thing, and there's injuries. What are kind of the stats on that you guys have found, and what are ways to mitigate those kinds of risks? Yeah.
I'll start by saying, I don't think that those types of accidents happen as often as people may be concerned about that. In fact, I'm not aware of many agencies that have published any statistics around that, because there isn't enough to really be worth publishing. That being said, there are implications that you need to consider to make sure you don't be the one who creates a publication around safety issues with drones, right? I would first go back to kind of what the FAA expects. Part of the Part 107 certification is ensuring that what they call a remote pilot in command, the person who's flying the drone, who's in charge of what's happening on site, that they have a basic understanding of what the safe operations look like. Have you checked your gear to make sure that batteries are attached well, that propellers are attached well? Do you know how to maintain your drone? And then things like, what does a safe operation look like? How far away are you from pedestrians? You can't fly and operate over people who don't know you're there. Those are all things that are part of the Part 107 certification. And then, just to be frank, some of it's pretty common sense. If I'm going to have a drone take off from the ground, I need to make sure I have a clear landing space, that there's sufficient area around me where no one can come in. When I'm landing the drone, am I aware of my surroundings to ensure that there isn't a child who's interested in that flying machine that's up in the air that they want to play with, right? Those are all parts of, I think, just good operation. The other thing I'll say is, I remember in the early days of drones, one of my first times I was down in Dallas, Texas, and these are on an older drone model. Anyone who's been in the drone space will be familiar with the terminology of flyaway. It's kind of like the drone decided it just wanted to go home and it just went. Those days were pretty scary because those created some of the stories of a drone was flying and it just dropped out of the middle of nowhere. I will say the technology has advanced in significant ways, even over the last 7 years. One of the tests that we sort of put our product through was on one spectrum, could a child use it? And so I remember having at the time, he would have been my 8-year-old boy, use our product to fly in a roof inspection, did it just fine. Then on the other end, we got on the field with someone who was like a 68-year-old adjuster and say, can they use the product just fine and be safe? And so we've sort of used those barometers to say, how easily could a drone flight and drone inspection be done safely on both of those spectrums? And fortunately, it's worked out really well.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's kind of my next question. Basically, what's the typical learning curve for an adjuster learning to use a drone for the first time?
Yeah, I would say one of the funny things I always told people is if they've ever played Call of Duty or some sort of first-person shooter game on an Xbox, you can fly a drone. The controls are actually relatively similar. That being said, there are softwares. We've built some of this. We're not the only one that's done it. DJI, a drone manufacturer, has their own internal software that operates on drones. There are a lot of organizations and technology companies who've written automated drone technology. The bigger question is, how well can I operate an app? Because whether you're using something that's entirely automated like ours can be, where what the pilot needs to understand is, what are the commands I give the app? And in our situation, it's give me an address, tap out the perimeter of the inspection you're looking for, give me a sense of heights and what's around the property, and then you hit launch and go and the drone will fly itself. That's on one's end of the spectrum, is how well can you operate an app and follow instructions. On the other side of it, the drone tech is really, really sophisticated. It's just a matter of being aware and how much time I want to spend there. One of the things that I remember telling an adjuster in the early days, this is a gentleman who was a bit older, was a bit worried about his ability to adopt technology. We sent the drone up and I said, listen, just put the remote controller on the ground for a second. And he's sitting there shaking, right? Because he's like, well, if I put the remote controller down, what's going to happen to the drone, right? You put the remote controller down and you realize that drone can hover for 30 minutes on its own in the exact same spot without drifting.
Yeah.
And so I always tell people, awareness and patience goes a long way when you're flying a drone. Because once you figure it out, those two things just kind of come flying it comes naturally if you're aware and you're patient.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the future. Specifically, where does carrier adoption stand these days? Are we getting close to it being mainstream? Are they anybody mandating it? Are they, or are they accepting it, holding their nose, or, kind of accepting things, or are they like any companies still like firmly against? And then maybe talk a little bit about Part 108. Is that a thing?
Well, they're trying to make it a thing.
Yeah. BVLOS. So, and then kind of explain what BVLOS, explain what that is and what that has to, why we would care about that.
Yeah. How about I start there, then I'll work backward to like the acceptance and what we're seeing. So Part 108 is an extension essentially of Part 107. BVLOS stands for Beyond Visual Line of Sight. So it's an acronym. The FAA loves acronyms. And so BVLOS, again, Beyond Visual Line of Sight. The implications are, in the current state of regulation, if I want to fly a drone for a commercial purpose, or in reality for any purpose, I need to be able to maintain line of sight with that. That's a safety consideration. So I need to be able to either myself or be in communication with someone who can see that drone at all times, so we understand the safety implications of the operation. What Part 108 and BVLOS would suggest is, can we do drone operations where the drone is no longer in sight of the operator, physical sight of the operator? When I'm operating a drone, I'll generally always have access to its camera and what the camera can see, but this is I can't see the drone itself. I will say, I think that part of the implication of it and the origin of that was around drone delivery. So there have been a bunch of organizations, Walmart's tested this out quite a bit over the last number of years, that are saying, can we load up a drone at a store and have it deliver material to someone's house so that they can get it in a matter of 10, 15 minutes without ever leaving their home? That's really one of the original drivers of BVLOS. Where the implications of that lies today for insurance and for adjusters, I would say it's akin to, after a CAT scenario, it's not uncommon for there to be what are called gray sky flyovers using an airplane, where within a couple of days after a CAT has hit a large area, someone sends up an airplane with high-resolution cameras, takes photos, so we get a good capture of that. I do think that in the BVLOS scenario for drones, that you could do the similar thing, but at a lower altitude, thereby potentially higher resolution. You can make different decisions on types of damage that are there that are harder to capture when you're flying an airplane. And so I do think there's an implication around that. There are also sort of these, I would call them what 6-7 years ago were pie in the sky ideas around how you inspect and adjust. Could you, in a CAT scenario, have someone operating remotely and send somebody out and to place some of these drone manufacturers have these boxes you can go put out there, and could I fly that box from miles and miles away and capture the photos directly onto my computer, so that instead of being out in that area where it could potentially be dangerous, where you don't want to infringe on the comfort of the people who are there already, and you have FEMA and other types of rescue operations happening, could I have a drone there helping me to inspect while I'm remote? That's a potential long-term thing that could happen. I don't think we're there yet, but that is a long-term implication for an adjusting group to say, could I use that at some point?
Now, what about carrier adoption?
This has been kind of fun for us. We've been selling our technology into carriers since 2017. We have some customers who've been using us since 2017 and are still active customers. I think the best way I could say it is, the adoption isn't what we want it to be. We would love for it to be all over the place in every scenario on every claim. The reality is we're not there yet. There are some carriers that we're aware of that in their internal operation, every single claim is done with a drone, unless they have a flight restriction that they can't get past. We are aware of other organizations who have been selective with how they use drones. Namely, can we use a drone when it's unsafe for our adjuster to get on site? In a situation where I would normally order a ladder assist, could I use a drone instead? So there's a variety of different use cases there, but generally speaking, we're seeing adoption grow. There is still some hesitation. I think the biggest hesitation that we see from a carrier standpoint right now is the cost of equipping all of their adjusters with drones. And so one of the trends that we've watched is we're actually hearing more and more that they're asking third parties to say, could you equip a team with drones? We like what the technology does. We like the level of imagery. We like the consistency. Is it possible for you to equip a team so that we don't have to burden the cost of that, the CapEx cost of that internally as a carrier? Now, I don't think any of that's quite mainstream yet, but we are seeing that more often. We also do business on the roofing contractor side. So one of our investors as an organization is Standard Industries. Standard Industries owns GAF. They're the largest roofing material manufacturer in the U.S. And so we do a lot of work with roofing contractors. And the reports we get back from them is consistently year over year over year, more and more of the work they're doing with drone technology is being accepted by the carrier. But the one caveat I'd say to that is I do think there was a time where many carriers were like, we're not going to use drones at all. We won't approve anything. That did hamper our adoption quite a bit. But in the same way that any new technology, any new strategy, even any new person who gets brought into the adjusting world as a third party has to go through some vetting. They have to go through some training. There has to be experiences where it's worked and where it hasn't so the carrier understands the right policies around that. I think we're getting to that stage now, where even if a carrier isn't using it themselves, they have policies and guidelines for their adjusters to allow for drone technology to be used when they're working with a contractor or they're working with an IA. We're seeing that more and more over the last couple of years.
You know, so we're in 2026 right now. What, based on everything that's happened from the start up to now, what does the next 3 to 5 years look like?
Oh man, you're asking me to play crystal ball, huh?
Yeah. Dust off the crystal ball.
I'll try to look at that through a little bit of lens in the history. That way it's grounded in something, right? Yeah. I remember when there was a market report put out by, I think it was Forbes back in like late 2016, early 2017, that talked about the size and the financial impact drone technology would have on insurance claims over the next 5 years. I don't think we've gotten to a fraction of that. We ran into regulation concerns. We ran into safety concerns. The insurance industry moves slower than Forbes probably forecasts in their market reports, right? You know, and so it's been slower than I think we'd all want in that regard, but it is promising. We just recently had a carrier triple the size of their drone fleet with us. And so we're starting to watch these kind of things happen where before, 3, 4, 5 years ago, hey, we're going to add 5 adjusters with drones. We're going to add another 10 here. We're going to add another 20 here. To triple an existing fleet says a lot about the tendencies that we're seeing in the industry right now. And so, I think that it's not going to move as fast as I'd like it to, but I do think we're going to start seeing some momentum building and adoption happening faster over time. Some of that's rooted in, we're in continual conversations with carriers, with large IA firms about what they're considering and what they're expecting to do and what they're hoping to do. And just without sharing a lot of detail, I know because of those conversations that some of the larger players are being more deliberate with what they're going to do. They're starting to lay out 3 to 5 year plans for how do we adopt drone technology. And again, I can't share who those are, but I can say based on the conversations we have that we're going to see acceptance of drone tech, whether it's the carrier using it themselves or having an external strategy that allows for more use with adjusters who are going to work on their behalf. We're going to see that grow. There was,
and I haven't kept up with this, so you can fill me in, a bunch of rigmarole in the news about DJI being banned or whatever. Right. So if that's the case, if that's the case, are there any American manufacturers or Korean or Japanese or somebody else that's making drones, or can you still get those drones? Or what does somebody who wants to buy a drone do?
Yeah, little bit of clarity around the current state of that, because I think the word rigmarole is exactly right to describe what's happened. And I'll give a little bit of history there. So dating back about 2 or 3 years, there have been, and some of it is driven by geopolitical issues. Sure. Some of it's driven by the desire to commercialize and bring more internally into the U.S. and how we do that. There have been sort of this big bad brother idea around DJI that they're sending information back to China and the communication around that creates issues. And so it started off as this idea that DJI drones aren't secure. And so we have to be careful. We should create restrictions around how people internally or in the United States are using them. Much of that's been debunked. There have been a lot of independent companies who have verified that that's not the case. There isn't personal information or photos being driven back and being stored in China, those kind of things. But it did create a lot of consideration around what do we do to regulate it. And so for the last couple of years, there's been attempts to say everything from let's ban the use of DJI, Chinese-made and DJI drones, period, to let's limit how much we can be bringing into the United States. And the reason for either one of those is going to be based on whatever there are different intentions there. When they said, hey, let's ban all DJI drones, what's ironic about that is that government agencies, particularly those who work in public safety, were the loudest opponents to that. Because one of the great use cases of drone technology right now is what public safety officers, rescue groups, SWAT groups, police groups, what they're doing with drones right now is incredible. There's amazing things that they're doing there. And so they stood up and said, we can't do that. So then there's all this back and forth. The current state is that there are limitations on what new models can be brought into the US from Chinese-made drones. And so they turned it over to the FCC, and basically they had an approved list of drones from DJI and other Chinese-made manufacturers that could be sold in the US. The latest regulation said they're not going to be adding any drones to that list. And so that's sort of where the concern around, oh, I can't fly a DJI drone continues to exist. The reality is, if you have if you've previously bought a drone, or you go and buy any one that's sold in the US or on Amazon or anywhere online that can get shipped here, it means they're on the approved list and you can use them to fly. Right now, after the specific date that the ban was supposed to happen, the reality was there was a bunch of drones that are on that list that you could sell. I watched Amazon just create all sorts of promotions around it, and they started moving product real fast. And so, you can still buy them today. You can still use them. Are there US-based manufacturers who are building drones? There are. Are they caught up to the technology that someone like DJI has at the price point you can buy a DJI drone? Not yet. Are there people who are going to get there? There are. We're aware of some companies that are trying to build technology that would meet that price point. But we're just a couple years behind as a blue blood drone industry here in the US. We're a couple years behind the DJI technology, but we'll get there at some point.
Gotcha. All right. So I'm an adjuster and I'm sold. I want to get into this. I want to start incorporating drones into my workflow. How do I engage with you guys? Do I engage with you guys? What are the next steps that I need to take?
I think that if we would love to engage with any adjuster who wants to talk about that. We can give them ideas on what kind of drones to buy. We can give them a rundown of how technologies are used. We can give them a rundown on other technologies that they may want to consider. We're obviously biased to ours, right? That's how our business stays around. But yeah, they can reach out to us. Our website, lovelandinnovations.com, will give you a bunch of information. It can put you directly in contact with members of our team. But I would simply start by saying this. I would basically look around and think, what are the parts of my job today that could be more efficient, safer, or that could be better at if I had technology with me. That way they can start thinking through, because especially if you're an independent adjuster, you want to sort of have your own idea about how to make the best of any technology. And then as you learn more about the available tech, then you can figure out who are the right ones to work with. But ultimately, a lot is going to come down to the people you're doing business with. Are they willing to use drones? Are they creating drone programs? And, if you're working with a large IA company, I would ask them about it. There are some that we know aren't talking openly or loudly about it yet, but they're building initiatives. And if they were approached by an independent adjuster, say, listen, I'm really interested in this. Are you folks doing anything here that I should be aware of, that I can prepare for? That's probably a good place for them to start.
And if you want to know how to become an independent property adjuster from zero to working step by step for free, check out this video right here. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great storm.